Picture this: raw fish wrapped in rice, eaten with your hands. Today, sushi is one of the most celebrated foods on the planet, served in five-star restaurants and gas station fridges alike. But the dish we know today looks almost nothing like where it actually started. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're tracing the strange, surprising history of sushi, from a method of preserving fish, to a fast food snack, to a global symbol of fine dining. The story doesn't even start in Japan. It starts in Southeast Asia, more than 1,000 years ago, with a preservation technique called narazushi. Rice farmers in the Mekong River region needed a way to preserve fish without refrigeration, which obviously didn't exist yet. They discovered that if they packed fresh fish in salt and rice, the rice would ferment. This fermentation produced lactic acid, which preserved the fish for months, sometimes even years. When the fish was finally ready to eat, the rice itself was actually discarded. It wasn't food, it was just a preservation tool. This technique spread to Japan around the 8th century, likely traveling along with rice cultivation itself. The Japanese adopted narazushi as their own, and for hundreds of years, it remained essentially the same. Fish fermented in rice for months, sometimes up to a year, with the rice thrown away before eating. But Japan would eventually transform this preservation method into something the rest of the world had never seen. And that transformation would take centuries. By the Muromachi period, around the 15th century, something changed. People started eating the rice along with the fish, instead of throwing it away. This new style was called namanare, meaning fresh narizushi. The fermentation time was shortened, which meant the rice retained more flavor and texture and was no longer just a byproduct. This was the turning point. Once people realized the rice itself tasted good, sushi stopped being purely about preservation. It started becoming about flavor. The next major leap happened in the early 1800s, in Edo, the city we now call Tokyo. A chef named Hanaya Yohei is widely credited with inventing what we now call nigiri sushi. Instead of fermenting fish for weeks or months, he simply took fresh raw fish and pressed it by hand onto a small mound of vinegared rice. No fermentation, no waiting, just fresh fish and rice, seasoned with vinegar to mimic that familiar tangy flavor people had come to expect from the old fermented version. This was revolutionary, and it happened for a very practical reason. Edo was a booming city, full of workers who needed fast, cheap food they could eat standing up at street stalls. Nigiri sushi was exactly that, Japan's first true fast food. It could be made in seconds and eaten in 2 bites. For decades, nigiri sushi stayed mostly local to Tokyo. It was a regional street food, something you'd find at small stalls in the capital, but not necessarily known across the rest of Japan. That changed because of a disaster. In 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake devastated Tokyo, killing over 100,000 people and destroying much of the city, including most of its sushi stalls. In the aftermath, sushi chefs who had lost their businesses scattered across the country, looking for new places to work and rebuild their lives. Wherever they went, they brought their craft with them. Within just a few years, nigiri sushi had spread from a Tokyo specialty into a nationwide dish. But there was still a problem. Sushi, at this point, was considered cheap street food, definitely not something refined or expensive. That image started shifting after World War II, during the American occupation of Japan. Street stalls were banned for health and sanitation reasons, forcing sushi vendors to move indoors into actual restaurants. This single regulation accidentally transformed sushi's image completely. It went from a casual street snack to a refined restaurant experience, served by trained chefs in a controlled, clean environment. By the 1950s and 60s, sushi had become associated with skill, precision, and craftsmanship. Becoming a sushi chef required years of apprenticeship. Some traditions required apprentices to spend years just learning to properly cook rice before they were even allowed to touch fish. Now, we cross the Pacific because the next chapter in Sushi's story happens in America. And it's where the dish would transform yet again, almost beyond recognition. Sushi arrived in the United States in the early 20th century, brought by Japanese immigrants, but it remained largely confined to Japanese communities for decades. Most Americans had never tried raw fish and were deeply skeptical of the idea. The turning point came in the 1960s and 70s as international travel increased and American interest in Japanese culture grew, partly fueled by Japan's post-war economic rise. In the early 1970s, a chef named Ichiro Mashita, working at a restaurant in Los Angeles, faced a real problem. American customers were squeamish about raw fish, especially the look of raw tuna or octopus, which seemed strange and intimidating to people unfamiliar with Japanese cuisine. Mashita needed a way to introduce sushi to American palates without scaring them away on the first try. His solution was the California roll. Instead of raw fish, he used cooked crab, along with avocado and cucumber. And critically, he flipped the roll inside out, putting the rice on the outside and the seaweed, called nori, on the inside, hidden from view. Many Americans found the look and texture of nori unappealing, so hiding it made the roll far less intimidating. The California roll became the gateway dish that introduced an entire generation of Americans to sushi. The California roll opened the floodgates. Throughout the 1980s, sushi restaurants began appearing in major American cities at a rapid pace. Sushi became associated with health, sophistication, and a certain kind of upscale lifestyle, especially as the low-fat, high-protein nature of the dish aligned perfectly with the fitness and wellness trends sweeping through America at the time. By the 1990s, sushi had fully entered mainstream American culture. It was no longer an exotic foreign curiosity. It was something you could find in shopping mall food courts and, eventually, grocery store refrigerators. One Japanese invention made mass-produced sushi possible at a scale nobody had imagined. In 1958, a restaurant owner named Yoshiaki Shiraishi was struggling to serve customers efficiently in his small sushi restaurant. Inspired by watching beer bottles move along a conveyor belt at a brewery, he had an idea. What if sushi plates moved past customers on a conveyor belt instead of being served individually by a chef? He called it kaiten sushi, meaning rotating sushi. Customers could simply pick up whatever plate caught their eye as it passed by. This system dramatically increased efficiency, reduced the need for highly trained chefs for every single order, and lowered prices significantly. Conveyor belt sushi restaurants spread rapidly across Japan and eventually around the entire world, making sushi accessible and affordable for millions of people who otherwise might never have tried it. Before we wrap up, let's talk about how far sushi has gone in terms of luxury, because the gap between street food and fine dining has never been wider. The most expensive sushi restaurant in the world is widely considered to be Sukiyabashi Jiro in Tokyo, run by chef Jiro Ono, who was still working well into his 90s and was the subject of the famous documentary Jiro Dreams of Sushi. The restaurant has only 10 seats, no menu, and a single tasting course that can cost several $100s per person, with reservations booked months in advance. And then there's the most expensive single piece of sushi ever recorded, a piece of bluefin tuna sold at a Tokyo fish auction for over $3 million. Not the whole fish for that price across a market. One single bluefin tuna, weighing about 600 pounds, sold at the New Year's auction at Tokyo's Toyosu Market. The price wasn't really about the fish itself, it was about prestige, tradition, and the symbolic importance of starting the year with the best catch available. So here we are, from a method of preserving fish that nobody intended to eat, to fast food sold on the streets of Edo, to a refined art form requiring years of apprenticeship, to a global phenomenon found in supermarkets, shopping malls, and the most exclusive restaurants on Earth. sushi crossed oceans, survived a devastating earthquake, adapted to American tastes with the invention of the California roll, and got reinvented again through a conveyor belt inspired by beer bottles in a brewery. And through all of that, it somehow never lost what made it special in the first place: the careful balance between rice, fish, and simplicity. Today, sushi is eaten in nearly every country on Earth, served in more styles and variations than anyone could count. It's not just Japanese food anymore. It's become a universal language of flavor, craftsmanship, and culture. And the next time you pick up a piece with your chopsticks, remember, you're tasting over 1,000 years of history. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more. See you next time.